Excited to welcome Ornella Baganizi and Black Robb to this stage to have a little talk back. I have to say at the top of this chat that when I stumbled upon this particular film, La Fábrica, I was super shocked because I studied in Havana in 2017, and Alexei, who's like the leader of Obsession, and his like now wife Amberly were both super welcoming to me and just like really opened up their home in a huge way to me. And I think like it's really special to see like them 20 years ago because they've always been so ingrained in the Cuban hip hop community and like still do that today. Like they open up their home in Regla and like have all these ciphers in their house and just like have people over, and it's like a Sunday tradition. So it's really special to see like how they continue this legacy and like where it came from. That's all to say that I feel like if you haven't visited our archives, you should spend time with our moving image and recorded sound division because you never know what you'll find. Yeah, many gems. But to start things off, I wanted to hear you both kind of speak to how it felt sort of watching those two films back to back. They're both from very different parts of the diaspora, but there's so much overlap there.
Well, the thing I noticed is how both films end. They both end by saying that that they're reaching the youth and they're contributing to the knowledge of young minds, and they're forming their opinions and giving information to young minds. And that's something that hip hop has been doing since almost from the start, because it was started by youth culture. And it was started from what I experienced in my life, from not having the things that were in schools. They were taking the music and art programs out of schools in New York, in the Bronx. And kids were like, well, how are we going to create? Well, we're going to take these two turntables and take pieces of records, and we're going to grab these microphones, and we're going to make our own art form, and we're going to have our own art class. We're going to have graffiti, which is art. We're going to have our own music class, which is hip-hop and rapping. We're going to have our own dance class, which is breaking. And we're going to do all of these things. We're going to create our own thing, though it is not being taught in school. It is not part of curriculum, but we're going to have it ourselves because that's something what community does. And it was formed by young people. So that was something that struck me, how both films ended. So that is a big pinpoint for me.
For me, I think even before watching it, this was my first time watching La Fabrique. I was trying to think about what are some similarities between Cuba and Tanzania. And I was just thinking back to the fact that both of these countries, Tanzania attempted to be socialist and Cuba is socialist. And I felt like you're saying, it sort of comes out in the message and how they're seeing hip hop as something that is supposed to be for the development of the country, of the nation, and of the people. So it was really nice to see this resonance. And also, I think aesthetically, I felt like there was a lot of similarities in how the movie was shot. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree on obviously the social aspect and socialist part of it, but also aesthetically, they're from a similar time period. So La Fábrica was made 2004, and the Tanzanian film was made in 1999. And I was wondering, Robb, if you can tell us a little bit about the founding of the Hip Hop Festival in 2002, and sort of just like, what were your initial collection practices in the Hip Hop Education Center collection? Like, what did that process kind of look like, and can you speak a little bit to the festival?
I speak from the festival from how the point where I entered into being part of the festival. I was producing events around the city just independently and with groups of people, and I was working on another event, a music event, like a music summit event in Manhattan. And one of the people that is part of the Hip Hop Film Fest, H2O, came to my event with Amaris is her name. I want to forget her name, Amaris, who's fantastic. She came to the event with a bunch of kids to volunteer. And I was like, who brought all these kids? And it's like it was like 30 kids all hopped up on bubblegum and soda doing like, okay, I need you to move this table, I need you to do that. And they were like introducing guests and they were doing everything. And so me and Amaris began talking. I was like, thank you for bringing all these kids for volunteering. And it's like, what else do you do? And she was like, oh, I'm part of the H2O Hip Hop Film Festival. And I was like, I've been dying to go to that. And it was like, she was like, well, my friend Martha, who's the producer, wants to come. I said, yeah, come down, definitely. So I met Martha, and me and her have been kind of collaborating ever since. Our first event was hip hop docs, hip hop seen through the eyes of video and filmmakers. And it was films and videos from different parts of the world, in case films from Africa, films from America, films from all different parts of America, different parts of the world. And that's how I entered into the film festival. And then I became a bigger part of the film festival itself, become contributing films and finding filmmakers and helping with programming and also helping with sponsors and things like that. And it, like I said before, I said during our call from our call yesterday, was that Martha always seems to find me at the right time. When I'm finishing a project or I'm not about to start something new just yet, and she's like, "Hey, I'm doing this thing," and I'm like, "Are you available?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, let's do this." So that's how I enter into it. As far as archiving films and documents and things like that, as far as the from the festival's perspective, is like Martha found it very important that like, these things are living records of everything that's happening at that particular time, and how film is very important. It's like somebody said, it's like writing history with lightning, and it's that exactly, and more so now with hip hop, because hip hop also does that. One of the things that Chuck D said is like, hip hop is the CNN of the ghetto. And one of the things that was said in the first film is that one of the rap groups, anything that's happening in that particular community, everybody knows because they talk about it, whether it be good, bad, or whatever. And as far as archiving the different objects and films for the festival, Martha thought it was important to have these things archived and have them in a place where people can find them. Thus, it being at the Schomburg, where, as you said, it's part of the film collection, because it has to be accessible. She wants the history to be accessible, that we understand. And this is youth culture talking. And now hip hop is how old now? So it's become youth culture that has continued to spread and to grow. But yes, it is, the people who found it are now a little older. So it's interesting to see all the different perspectives of history.
Absolutely. I guess I'm curious for you if in the beginning, it seems like from the beginning there was such a transnational focus to the collection itself. Like there's films from Puerto Rico, from Cuba, from all over West and East Africa. Like can you describe a little bit that process of sort of like locating these various different hip hop movements across the world? Do you have any sort of experience with like working with the filmmakers directly, or like what was that sort of process like to sort of tap into these scenes?
As far as I know, a lot of filmmakers from those particular countries were like, this needs to be documented. Mm-hmm. That's why there is a film. Yeah. Because they want to show the world what's happening in this particular part of the world. We just happen to be doing a film festival that wants to show these types of films. And I think Martha was just in the right place at the right time, creating this film when she created the film festival and founded the Hip Hop Education Center, putting all those different things together. And she noticed that like a lot of the filmmakers were putting together educational platforms, putting together educational programs and things like that where they were. So it's like, well, if you're doing education, I should be doing education as well, to add on to what the film was saying and the things that they were projecting. And as far as finding the filmmakers goes, it can be difficult. Yeah. Because it's usually through like, you know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody that's making a film, so let's get them to submit their film, and then you go through the process of submission and things like that. One thing that was very beneficial for the film festival, as it gained momentum and began to grow more legs, there were people who were purposely making films for the film festival. They didn't care if they got into anything else. They were making films specifically for our film festival, and that's one of the things that really blew me away. Even as we were winding it down and we weren't doing the festival anymore, I literally had people who were stopping me going, "Hey, Rob, Once the film festival, I have a film, and I want to submit it, and also repeating that same thing. I don't care if I get into Tribeca. I don't care if we get into this. I don't care if we get into that. I need to be in this film festival because it speaks to the hip hop audience. It speaks to the hip hop generation. It's exactly the audience that we want to reach. And I just thought that was like, to me, that is incredibly powerful. That like they just want to get into our film festival specifically.
Absolutely, and thank God they reached out because
Yes, absolutely.
It's such a blessing to see so many different kind of films in one space.
And as far as I guess, like if we were doing the festival now, of course, we utilize technology to reach out to all the different platforms like social media and things like that, and all like in Dropbox, et cetera, to kind of get filmmakers to upload their film and things like that. So as time has gone on, yes, it is easier to get films from different parts of the world because the reach is easier via technology, via the internet. Back in the day, it was like, who's got a film? We got to find the filmmaker. We got to track on. We got to send them a letter. We got to send them an email. We got to call somebody, send us your film, and then we go from there. So
Absolutely. I was wondering, Ornella, can you tell us a little bit about sort of the social context in Tanzania at the time that this film came out? Can you like paint us a picture of the landscape a little bit?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the movie, there's like writing and it says liberalization and globalization sort of produced or emerged the scene in hip hop in Tanzania. And the emergence of hip hop in Tanzania really coincides with sort of the political situation in the country. So after independence, the independence leader, Julius Nyerere, really tried to build a socialist state. So Tanzania, well, before it was Tanzania, it was Tanganyika, which gained independence in 1961, and then there was Zanzibar, who got independence in 1963, and then they unified in 1964. So Julius Nyerere really wanted to pursue sort of an African socialist state called Ujamaa, which is often known as cooperative economics, but also his ideas were mostly national self-reliance and also African socialism, but anti-colonialism throughout Africa. So in trying to build this socialist nation, he was really big on building unity within the country, but in some way he really also closed the country off to the global market. So even like in 1973, public radio stations weren't allowed to play foreign music because he really wanted to emphasize local artists and build sort of a local Tanzanian identity that wasn't influenced by outside countries. So what happened is, so he pursued all these different policies to try and be self-sufficient, mostly focusing on agriculture and building sort of communal farms. It did eventually not succeed. And in 1985, he willingly stepped down from being president. And after him, his successor actually pursued more liberal economic policies. And that really coincides with the emergence of hip hop in Tanzania, because it was the first time that Tanzania opened itself up more to the global market. So they were able to get more just like music from outside of the world, from America. Radios were able to play hip hop. So what's interesting in Tanzania is when hip hop first started, it was actually upper class Tanzanian, upper class youth that had access to the music, and that's just because they had access to the outside world, to Western market, by being able to travel. But in the 1990s, as like socialism really sort of disseminated in the country, that's when the rest of the population also was able to enter this market and to have access to hip hop. So that's how it started.
Thank you for sort of setting that stage, because I think that's a really important point to kind of rest on, is like both of these films are coming out of like the sort of height of neoliberalism, right? So in 2004, when the Cuban film came out, that was sort of right after their huge special period, which was the period of like deep economic precarity after the fall of the Soviet Union in Cuba. So they were really, really hard times. So they were sort of like coming out of that. But I think what's interesting about both of these films is that they show kind of almost the like, I don't want to say the good parts, because it's not, like nothing about neoliberalism is good, but I think that there's something that like is speaking to like the sort of interconnectedness of the diaspora that's happening. Like I love in the last film where we get to see sort of like all of the artists from Obsession sort of like being in conversation with sort of the West in this way that's like critical, because they've been kind of familiar with sort of the beginning and history of hip hop through sort of the opening up of the industry a little bit. But yeah, I guess I wanted to also linger sort of in the world of oral history, since that's your area of focus, but also I wanted to think about sort of the relationship between oral history and memory across West and East Africa, and how I guess that plays into histories of hip hop. Like, what is the relationship between hip hop and oral history, and how do you see those in dialogue?
Yeah, I think there's a big relationship between oral history and hip hop. I feel like hip hop in the United States, but also specifically in Tanzania, comes from a tradition of oral history and oral tradition of just speaking of history, and specifically in the context of Tanzania. Hip hop, although it's influenced from the United States, it's also coming from a legacy of Swahili oral tradition and Swahili poetry, which the history of Swahili poetry is that it used to be spoken, it even used to be sang. So I think there's a very clear correlation, and for me, that's one of the reasons that hip hop makes a lot of sense in a lot of diasporic communities and African communities, because it is already ingrained in the culture to have sort of a oral tradition and an oral history that is spoken. So, yeah.
Yeah. For both of you, I'm curious, like, sort of jumping off of that, why do you feel like hip hop is such a conducive medium for sort of political organizing work, and also sort of for vocalizing social struggle in general?
Well, I think it's because it's where it comes from. Like I said before, when they were taking music and art out of schools and they were depriving us of all these things, that's political. That's very much political. So, and it comes from black people, which our very existence is political. So there are people that don't want us to speak, that do not want us to express ourselves, that don't want us to be whole. So if it's an art form and it's a culture that's created by black people, it will inherently be very political. So we cannot overlook that. That's very important. And even if it's something that's like people seeing it as something that's commercial, it came from the very seeds of people saying, I have to push back against this. This is not fair. We don't like the way we're being treated. And they're voicing it very loudly. And that is political voice, just like at its root from black people.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the genre of hip hop is meant to be political. Like, that's part of what the genre is to talk about the social and political situations of the people. So you can't really divorce that from the genre. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I think what's so special about seeing, I think, like, hip hop across the world in these various different movements is that I just obviously always think about its origins, right? So like 1973 South Bronx, and sort of just the way that it has literally traveled around the world across the diaspora, something like that feels so beautiful to me, and like something to uplift all the time. And I think like there's something really special about the way that like across the diaspora we have embraced this tradition, like, and so quickly, right? In truly just like immediately, I feel like it just hit across, like cross-continent.
Absolutely.
Which is so special. Yeah.
Yes.
I tend to be a little chatty sometimes, so I gotta defer my like a little too much.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to even speak to the context of Tanzania, one thing that made hip hop accepted is when people started rapping in Swahili. In Tanzania, like, it's a big country, there's over 120 ethnic tribes, all of them have their own languages, but part of this effort for Julius Nyerere to create a unified identity, he used Swahili, and that really has become an identity, a language, a culture, and I'm a Swahili student, And I now speak Swahili, and it's a language that I just really love because of its ability to do that, the fact that it was really able to create a whole identity and to avoid and repress ethnic division in Tanzania specifically. So I find it so important that hip hop in Tanzania is in Swahili, which makes sense that it would be because that's what the people talk. But that's what also made it gain just like acceptance within the community, because now that felt like something that was theirs.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I want to sort of linger on something that comes up in both films, which is like the sort of fear but also resistance towards censorship. I'd like to like linger in that space just because I'm curious for you all as we sort of think about the future of hip hop, like, and sort of the political and social climate that we're in now. Are there strategies or techniques or artists that you think come to mind when you think of sort of like confronting censorship?
It's funny because I was thinking about that when we were watching the movie on the Tanzanian hip hop, and I felt like there's more of an acceptance of censorship. Like maybe it wasn't like so overt, but I was noticing it, how they're like, well, if you talk bad about the government, you're not gonna get played. And even there was one artist in Zanzibar that was like, things that we don't talk about are politics. So it feels almost like in the Tanzanian context, there was more of an acceptance of censorship. And that still goes back to the government trying to build this unified identity and just trying to make a really socialist country. So they took ownership of a lot of the industries, a lot of the banks. And even in pushing the ideology of socialism, in some ways they were also very authoritarian. So like a big thing that people can't do is critique the government, specifically in Tanzania, but I think in a lot of African countries. And I still don't know what is a way that students or youth are able to kind of get around that censorship. So I don't really have an answer for your question, but that's something that I was noticing, how I felt like maybe in the Cuban context, there was a little bit more of a pushback against that censorship versus a little bit more of an acceptance, which also goes to just more of a cultural aspect of Tanzanian culture also, which is like not so much wanting to go against who is above you as an act of respect. So, yeah.
From what I noticed in both films is that censorship is always kind of lingering in the background. I'm going to say what I want to say, but I'm going to have to be a little clever about it. My wordplay must be interesting, and that's something that hip-hop does. It takes the vocabulary of the wordplay and puts it in a context of, like, the audience understands what I'm saying, but somebody else who's not part of the culture might not understand what we're saying. And that's the power of speaking a coded language. So hip hop does that excellently. And something I think, and I don't live in either one of those places, so I'm not sure, but something I know exists in many places, kind of an underground culture, where you could speak very freely and you could speak in a way using the coded language in a very free way because your audience understands exactly what you're saying and who you're talking about. And it's like, in that, the censorship does not exist. But maybe when it reaches the mainstream and people can uncode the coded language, oh, they're talking about us. I'm like, yeah, they are talking about you. And that's when I think a lot of pushback does happen. But it's like, as far as like what you hear maybe on the regular, in the, I guess, every day, you may not hear it as much because they might tend to code it. They might codify it because you got to disguise it. And like I said, hip hop does that very, very well through wordplay and the use of vocabulary. And one thing that we've noticed in the education of kids when they're listening to hip hop is that their vocabulary tends to expand when they're using hip hop because you have to use so many words to express yourself. So it's interesting to see how that happens in that respect. But as far as censorship goes, hip hop in itself, like I said, since it is political, it always seems to push against what is happening, and it has to find an interesting way to say it.
Yeah, I love what you're saying because I think in its structure, like formally, hip hop will always be sort of clever. It's about wordplay. It's about sort of disguising meaning within different words and within rhymes, right? So I really do think of it as a technology, as an instrument, and I think that gets really echoed in both films. I guess something that I also am curious about with both films and also the time period that both films were shot is that there are all these sort of like informal ways that sort of music is getting passed through culture in general, right? So it's like the cassette tape and various different forms of just like transferring information. I guess, Rob, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to technology and just like how technology has influenced and kind of played up and against hip hop's sort of circulation.
Well, hip hop in itself invented its own technology. So,
Exactly.
so I mean, let me use these two turntables and make music. Let me maybe take a piece of this record and a piece of that record and the beat from that and make a whole new musical composition that did not exist. The use of sampling, the use of sampling of like other people's words and your own words and combining it. It's its own technology in itself. And one of the things I've seen in a past documentary is that people used to build their own equipment, things like that. So since let's deal with things that are happening now through each kind of, actually, as it speaks to in the film, you said there were cassette tapes, and people say, hey, can I get a tape? And as you can see in the second film, there were a stack of CDs. Who remembers CDs? I remember CDs. Of course, we all remember CDs. But, there was always the vinyl record, and it's what you use to transmit that message. Now, of course, nowadays it's the internet and streaming and things like that. But I guess hip-hop nowadays takes the technology and uses it to kind of broadcast itself. So one person had a cell phone, which was like, wow, that's a really old cell phone. You can't even take pictures with it. Yeah. You can't shoot video with it, but you can transmit your message by dialing someone wirelessly in that capacity. So it's like hip-hop both invents its own technology and uses technology that is present to kind of transmit its message no matter what the medium may be.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't agree more. I guess, well, we're going to open it up to the audience for Q&A in just a moment, but and you can use the two mics back there to line up there. But before we go there, I want to sort of close out with just one final question around what do you think we could learn about the future of hip-hop from both of these films?
Let me think. I want to answer a different question.
Answer a different question.
I almost want to answer, like, what can the film teach us about the past? Because I think this Tanzania, the situation, and what I find so interesting about the country and hip-hop, too, is when it even became, hip-hop is conscious and they're trying to talk about their issues, but in Tanzania itself, there was also a really big Pan-African consciousness. And I think that's a legacy of the first president, Julius Nyerere. And I don't know, to me, when I look at Tanzania and its history, it's so imaginative. Like, he was really trying to build a nation that was anti-colonial. So even in uniting Tanganyika and Zanzibar, that was his attempt of creating a unique African nation that wasn't bounded by colonial borders. And all of that is still present, or is present in the hip hop, because that's the consciousness that the youth that now did hip hop grew up in. And even during that time period, Julius Nyerere, some of his policies were really about, he supported Black liberation struggles in South Africa, and just the audacity and the vision that he had in trying to create a Pan-African nation that, focused on agricultural development and trying to build up agricultural development, but like villages. I just think that that's very different than what we're used to and what we know of countries trying to build their independence, and it's so specific to an African nation and a Black nation. And that's something that I don't know if that came through in the film. I know this because of my research, but it's something I really wanted to bring up is sort of the legacy on which Tanzanian hip hop lives, is this historical legacy of Tanzania that is so deeply rooted in Pan-Africanism and socialism, but African socialism specifically, and how like studying that could help us to think of new systems for ourselves now. So yeah, that's the question I wanted to answer.
What I think we can take from both films, that's the question, yes?
Yeah, and the future of hip hop.
And the future of hip hop. Well, first of all, the future of hip hop has yet to be written, and I think who is going to be writing it is the youth that's coming up now. And if they have the opportunity to see what has been done in the past and how hip hop was created and how they use the technology that they have in their hands and in their pockets now, what is the message that they want to transmit? And how will they do it? Because the hip hop of now sounds radically different than what I was coming up and what I was hearing. I mean, 2 turntables and a microphone. They got cell phones and computers and iPads. They're just doing it totally different. And then they have people who are on top of the turntables and the microphones in addition to. So it's like what that technology will be in the future will also shape what hip hop sounds like and what it looks like, and new people coming into having a voice. We have an artist like I'm going to use Bad Bunny as an example, who does not rap in English, but he is a superstar around the world, and he made people come to him on his island, and he did a residency. That to me is super powerful. How people can take like, this is where I am. You must come to me now, and so it's that use of like. How you take action in using hip hop as the tool to do that. And I'm very curious and I'm excited to see what the next generation is gonna do, because as this generation gets a little older, their music will change and they will see new things, and particularly how things are today, how they will push back against it. I think what's coming is going to be very interesting and also very powerful. So I think that will be the future of hip hop. Its power, I think its power and its presence will increase, because I think it just has to. There's no two ways about it. I can't see hip hop being quiet ever. No. It's like, it's just not in its nature. It will never be that way. So I think that's the future of what I think hip hop will be, and how people can see that in these 2 films is look at where it is presently in that time, of 2 films that were from 2 radically different places on the map, but the things that they have in common is that they were pushing back against things. It may have to take a different form in the environment where they were, but that's something that was persistent. So
yeah, I love that point, and I think it also gets to what you were just saying, Ornella, like at the heart of it is also Pan-Africanism and what it means to be in diaspora. So it's in our nature, and it will always be. Yeah.
And maybe to actually answer the question, what I hope the movie on Tanzania would teach us, or hope it could bring for the future of hip hop, going off what you're saying, I hope, and I think we're seeing that hip hop is just not just in English. I mean, both of these movies weren't even in English.
Yes.
So seeing that there may be more of a space with hip hop of different languages, getting some time and some world recognition, and specifically for the context of Tanzania, maybe people being more interested in Swahili hip hop and bringing that as the center, what that would do. I think it's hard for maybe Tanzanian hip hop to be recognized on the world stage because it's in Swahili, so it's only accessible to people who speak in Swahili. But there could be so much to really gain and so much inspiration if it did become somehow the center.
Yeah, I think if you have one artist that breaks through, or it gets through, I guess, the underground, so to speak, that helps bring it to the forefront. And like I said, I'm excited to see what's going to happen, and the use of technology, and how things are very accessible now via that technology. How it's like I could now take a music and I could spread it, I could post it someplace, and how X amount of people see it and view it. And that's how I learned. I was always one of those people who wanted, like, what's this? What's that? And now the internet makes that a little easier. Yeah. So it's like one artist breaks through, and then the floodgates open, and now we hear about the artist, but we also hear about what's happening in that particular community. That is exciting.
Yeah, and I think also it was mentioned in both, but even in the Cuban movie, it's like at first they were trying to do pure hip hop, but then they realized that they have to incorporate their own musical rhythms, and that's what happened in Tanzania as well. Eventually, at the beginning, they were just sort of imitating, they were rapping over American beats, but eventually the genre adapts to the social cultural context. So now you have hip hop in Tanzania that has morphed into another genre called bongo flavor, which also is its own distinct genre. They're often used interchangeably, but the difference is now they're using Tanzanian beats, they're using more African drums in the music. So I think that's another thing that is possible for the future, is that you will have just a mixture of all these different cultures and their musical heritage that is incorporated in hip hop.
Yeah, I think that's so important to foreground, and something I feel like we could yap about forever is like hip hop is really in not only the lyrics, but really the affect, the energy, right? So it's like, even if you're listening to like bars in a language that you can't understand, you could feel them, you know? And I think like that's super important to sort of uplift when we think about the history of hip hop, and like the future of it is that it's gonna keep improvising and changing and keep collecting new information based off of who is delivering that information and like the stories that are being shared, but we can still feel it like transnationally, which I think is really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one example is that in the first film, that little kid with the red sweater.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
That kid was like, I don't know what that kid's saying, but he is killing it. I was
He's
like,
going off.
Yeah. I was like, yeah, give me more of that kid.
Yes.
That kid. I was like, what's that kid doing now?
Exactly.
That's what I want to know. I need to locate that kid.
Exactly.
'Cause he was just like going for it, and I was like, yes, that's what we need.
Exactly. So anyone who wants to chime in, have a thought, a question, please, line up at the back.
Questions, many questions. Give us all the questions. Form a line, take a number. If you get on live, I figure by the time you get to the mic, you'll have formed your question.
Yes.
That's usually what I do.
That's a good point.
Hi, I'm Zoe. I guess I have a question for all three of you because you all kind of touched on it. I have been in Kathmandu for the past 3 years, and it's funny because they also will play I guess American source hip hop beats and rap over it, but in Nepali. But what was super interesting to kind of observe was the kind of the integration between Lord Shiva chants, in ancient hymns and that are related to Buddhism and Hinduism, and also kind of what you were saying in Tanzania about the integration and touching on ancestral knowledge and oral history and how that combines. And I guess this is kind of a niche question, but have you picked up on any integration of actual old prayer or rituals integrating into the, I guess, what hip hop is now in Tanzania?
I can't answer that question specifically, but I think so, because like I said, a lot of Swahili hip hop also is coming from Swahili poetry, and there's different forms of Swahili poetry, but a lot of them were also sort of religious texts, so there's different forms of Swahili poetry too, so there's a lot of epics. So naturally that blends into the genre itself, but I couldn't tell you specifically because I'm a Swahili student, but I still have issues understanding what they're actually saying in the raps.
I would say not necessarily in Tanzania, but definitely religious practice and spiritual practice does inform hip hop in seeing it in Cuba, for example, because a lot of the drums and bass is based in palo and various different Cuban spiritual practices around that are sort of syncretic and sort of grounded in Santeria and palo and all these various different traditions that bridge various parts of the diaspora together.
I'm curious what people in the audience thought of the films and what did they think. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. I can't believe we have a room full of black folk and we did not have questions. I see somebody moving towards the microphone. Maybe more than one person. There you go.
Hi, y'all. One of the big themes of the movies is just like the emphasis on the youth in hip hop. And so I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on like, as hip hop grows and like hip hop fans are getting older, it's 50 now, right? 50 plus years old. How do you see older hip hop fans and the youth working in tandem within like the hip hop community?
How I see it, or have kind of, I think it's usually when a younger audience or a younger artist embraces an older artist's music and says, yes, this is somebody that inspired what we've done, what we do. And you see some of that in the film when they meet, in the second film when they meet African Bambaataa. And they're like, that's somebody that we automatically recognize. And I think that has a lot to do with Pan-Africanism. So like how he's like the one, like people know who he is in all these Pan-African these Pan-African countries, because he literally, like, Africa is in his name, literally. So it's like, yes, we recognize who you are and what you're all about. And yes, we need to continue to spread the message that what he started, and people who started hip hop in the very beginning, and continue that type of message. Yes, put our own point of view on it, but yes, continue to spread it. That's kind of where I see it right now. Also, I think the people who are making music now need to get a little older, and as they get older, they look backward and going, "Hey, where did this come from? Where did that sample come from? Mm-hmm. Who did it originally?" And like, I noticed that a lot of artists now are paying homage to older hip hop by repeating older hip hop and saying, "Hey, this artist said this. Now I'm putting this in my rap, putting this on this song," and that brings that older record back.
I agree. I feel like hip hop is self-referential in that way because it's about quotation. There's always like quoting either from the sample or from the lyrics itself. So I think that relationship between the youth and older generations is kind of innate in the structure of hip hop itself. Like it'll constantly keep circling back in the same way that like in the origins of hip hop, what they were doing was sort of like quoting disco records and sampling from there. Like there's always this like looking back and digging and like crate digging, I feel like, is at the foundation of hip hop.
Yeah, and I think something that was shown in the documentaries is there's a lot of teaching. Like all of the hip hop groups, like in the one about Tanzania, there was youth around, and it was really about teaching the youth as this is a mean of expression that you can use. So I see it like as older hip hop heads teaching younger kids like how they can use this as their own genre and how they can apply it to their lives. So.
Yep.
Question?
It's not much of a question, but more of a comment, and then maybe...
Could you stand a little closer to the mic, please?
Can you hear me better?
Yes.
There we go. So it's not really a question, but more of a comment. I feel like you were all hinting at like something, and in regards to the future of hip hop, it seems to be headed toward more female-centered. Since Common's hit, hip-hop has always been assigned the feminine pronouns, and there was a lot of hint of that with, like, we're talking about youth culture, and that's more maternal. And in the Tanzanian film, it was a lot of focus on essentially safe sex and having a female condom. And in the Cuban film, it kind of ended on the note with like the niece idolizing her rapper uncle. And I guess the comment that I'm making, or the question I'm trying to get, is how do you all feel about that and kind of the erasure or less focus in between both of the films, because it's male dominated?
So not to be male dominated, I'm going to be quiet and let women speak.
Yeah, that's something I noticed in the film about Tanzania. There was maybe one person that presented, or might have been a woman. Yeah, and I was almost disappointed in that, but I think it's an accurate representation of the scene. And I'm hoping, from your point, I'm hoping that the future of hip hop does mean that there will be more space for women, as maybe culturally even women get more space in the context of Tanzania. It's not predominantly Muslim, but there's a very big Muslim community, in which women don't have as much space maybe to publicly talk, so they don't have as much space in the rap scene to be public about it. But nowadays there are more female artists that are present, so I am hoping that just the future of hip hop does highlight more women. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think also, like, so much has changed in the 25 years of making these films. Like, I would say, like, the last time I was in Havana, there were so many female MCs, and they were constantly at the forefront of sort of the hip-hop movement there. And, like, I feel like I see it just, like, across the diaspora. There are so many, like, women at the fore of the hip-hop scene, from, like, Brazil's baile funk to dembo to, like, various different sort of iterations that incorporate hip-hop across the diaspora. I would say, there could be more, there always could be more, but I think right now there is quite a big difference between, 25 years ago even, yeah.
I see another question.
This will be our last question, unfortunately, but take it away.
Hi. Unfortunately, I didn't see the first one because I was at an event, but the film on Cuba made me resonate. I studied in Cuba in the 90s, and back in those days is when the hip-hop movement started, and Asada Shakur was a mentor to a lot of those young people that lived in Alamar and some of the other neighborhoods where they were, starting with hip-hop. So people used to go to, like, the Casa de Cultura. They have culture houses in every, like, borough, and that's where they used to start. So that's something to think about. Like, Asada Shakur was literally like the mom to a lot of these people in the late 90s. Not the late 90s, I would say like the mid 90s to late 90s. And I was just there in the summer, and they have a place called La Rampa, Pabellón Cuba. So they have like an art exhibit, and they still have like rappers, but they don't really I don't think they get enough, I would say, support in comparison to like the salsa, bands. Even when it comes to like just setting up the stage, there was like a lot of like issues. It's still very much underground. So that's just something to think about. But they're persistent. So they do what they have to do. And they definitely, as someone said, they're Pan-African. They have, they're still getting into like their cultural, they are combining the stuff with like the Afro-Cuban roots, but also they're proud of like the African American and the African partnerships. So thank you.
Of course. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. And the next Black on Screen will be on January 27th, and we'll be screening Prince and the Revolution live. So a live concert by Prince from 1985. And then we'll have a Q&A after that. And that'll be the last one of this season that looks at music. So we hope you can make it, and thank you so much for coming out tonight.